go. Okay, so recent developments with R Markdown. As Malcolm said, my name is Alison Hill. Here's some of the links so you can learn more about my work. I'm a data scientist and professional educator at Rstudio. A lot of my work is open source. Some of it is in public GitHub repositories under my personal account, but I also work on a lot of the public repositories under Rstudio and Rstudio Education GitHub organizations. I'm pretty active on Twitter, and I try to use that as a nice feedback channel for pretty enthusiastic adopters of our packages to find out things that are gelling and not gelling when they're using them. So you can usually find me on there. And I have a non-well updated at this point website, alison.arbind.io. I am an infrequent blogger. I would like for there to be some kind of system for like impact factors for blogs that you have empowered, even by not posting myself, but hopefully I've paid it forward by encouraging other people to start their own blogs. So one of them being Malcolm, I think. Oh no, Malcolm, I didn't train you. You already had yours. You were an early adopter. So in the R Markdown ecosystem, we have about 20 packages. So some of these might be surprising to you when you see them kind of all on a list, but we're actually a little bit bigger as an ecosystem than even the Tidyverse. And for me, as an educator, when I taught Tidy models, I felt like that was a lot of packages. But when I started looking at the R Markdown ecosystem, I was like, gosh, that's a lot. Even just the ones under the Rstudio organization. So this list shows you the GitHub organization on the left and then the name of the package on the right. Even just the ones alone in the Rstudio organization, there's quite a lot. So we have R Markdown, which is sort of like the granddaddy package of all of these. They're all built on top of that. We have Distill, Flux Dashboard, the Learn R package, Tufty, Bookdown, Blogdown, Markdown, Articles, PageDown, Reveal.js, and then xaringan for making slides is in eWay's private GitHub, and then knitr as well, which I'm sure many of you are familiar with if you've used R Markdown. It's kind of one of the building blocks for being able to include our code in your R Markdown documents. And then a lot of these are kind of more under the hood, very important things that you may or may not interact with, but are there nonetheless in all of those packages. So we have quite a large suite of packages that we're maintaining that relate to this ecosystem. But the ones that I wanted to share with you about today were the ones that we've been working pretty hard on improving the usability of. So the first one that I wanted to tell you about and maybe share some new things about is the Distill package. And this one is got the most updated version currently on CRAN. So if you install packages Distill from CRAN, you're going to get the most up-to-date version with all the bells and whistles that I'll be talking about here. And I'm going to do a demo to show you guys a little bit more about the experience of using Distill now. So Distill, if you haven't heard about it, it's an output format for R Markdown that's optimized for scientific and technical communication. So what does that mean? That means that it has some nice places to add some metadata that a lot of scientists and people who do technical communication care about, like being able to add your ORCID ID, being able to have a Creative Commons license statement, being able to link to the source code for any kind of blog post. A lot of these kind of nice things that you might have thought before when you were working with any kind of HTML-based output with R Markdown, that like, oh, that would be kind of nice, or maybe you've seen it on somebody else's site and you thought, oh, how did they do that? Distill has tried to build in those features for you so that there's less friction for you to be able to make something that's easier to share. Distill also has nice CSS, which means it has kind of nice styling right out of the box, and I'll show you an example in a second so you can see what I mean. For the most part, we hope that it's not something that you want to change a lot of, but I'll share with you some of the improvements that we've made along the way recently in the latest version. And one of the primary benefits of Distill is that there's no extra dependencies. So Distill allows you to make HTML-based outputs, including full websites, with no additional dependencies like any kind of static site generator. So if you've ever built a website and tried to use Jekyll or Hugo or any other static site generators, there's a lot of flavors of them. You may have been dissatisfied and thought, oh, I just want to host some HTML pages on a website and be able to share them and link to them easily. So I think Distill is a pretty good answer for being able to do that. If you've ever used R Markdown, the actual base package of R Markdown does have a built-in site generator. And so Distill essentially wraps that up. With the R Markdown package, you could have made websites pretty similar to Distill before, but Distill again has some additional bells and whistles that make it really optimized for scientific and technical communication. So I'm going to show you real quick just the actual documentation site for Distill. It's taking a second to load. So this site is built with Distill. So you can see that it has a built-in site search, which works pretty nicely. So I'm going to do a search for theme. And you can see that what pops up are a few different pages. So you can see that there's Distill Basics, Distill for R Markdown, creating a blog, creating a website. And you can also click on ORCID IDs for each of the individual authors. You can see their affiliations. You can see a citation that's automatically generated, and that's going to be consistent with Google Scholar citations, so people can search for your article. There's this nice appendix at the very bottom. So that was the very top of the article. That's the header. At the very bottom, you've got this nice little like reproducibility appendix that has the ability to add acknowledgements. You get footnotes with Distill, and they are hoverable, but they linked down to here. So if I click on this little link right here, it's going to take me back up to where it is. And you can see that that's actually a hoverable footnote. You also have the ability to add this attribution citation, the BibTeX citation, and a lot of other bells and whistles that we think make Distill really nice for being able to publish research or more, data science, code-related blog posts or articles. You can render figures kind of nicely going across and outside of the article margins. So this is a website that's built with Distill. It's just a collection of Distill articles. So Distill articles are the HTML format for single Distill RMD files. So you can knit to a single Distill article, but if you want to have a full website, then you'll knit a few RMD documents to Distill articles. And Distill also offers you the opportunity to have a blog, which allows you to have a really nice listing page. So I'm going to show you the Rstudio Ai blog, which is a great example of this. So when you go to the Rstudio Ai blog, you can see that there's this nice listing page, which is sort of like a menu of all your different blog posts. Shows you a nice little preview image, some metadata, some categories, and then you click on each individual article to be able to see the individual blog posts. So that's a really nice benefit of Distill. So if you wanted to make a simple website that has this kind of upper navigation bar, the ability to have drop-down menus and some nice metadata and some nice out-of-the-box CSS styling, I think Distill is a really good option for people who really want kind of no muss, no fuss, but they want something to look really polished and nice for being able to share publicly. And we know that a lot of teams actually use Distill for team blogs as well. So it's really nice for collaboration too. But what we heard frequently from users was that they just wanted to change like the fonts, the colors, the size. A lot of people actually wanted to use Distill to be able to make internal knowledge repositories for their companies, for their Meetup groups, and even just for their personal websites. And that was really one of the legitimate knocks against Distill for us as developers, was that we knew that it was hard to customize. Even if you knew CSS, some of the things were a little bit difficult to figure out. So what we did with this latest release was we developed something called the themer. So I'm going to do a short demo and show you how to use that now. So I'm also going to show you the documentation for theming. So you can actually theme an individual Distill article or a Distill website. I'm going to show you how to do a website, and I'm going to use the documentation to guide me. So I'm going to start a new project in my Rstudio. And I'm going to pick a Distill website. RUG. And I'm going to create my project. You can see that a lot of stuff is happening. It opens my nice new project, and I do have some pretty custom things set up on my desktop, so I apologize. At night, I switched to the cupcake theme, so that's why it's very pink. So you can see that I have an index.rmd file. Over here in my files pane, you can see a little bit more about what all populated here. So if you've ever made an R Markdown site before, you have an underscore site YAML. So this is really kind of driving that upper navigation bar. So that's where the name and the title of the website come from. And you can see that I've got a home button, an about button, and then this output distill article tells it that all the individual pages are going to be output to that same output format. So I'm just going to render this site really quickly so you all can see what it looks like out of the box. So I use the build tab in the Rstudio IDE and I built the website. And you can see in the viewer pane, I'm going to pop it out into a big window that I've got my nice little website right here with a home page and an about page. So that's straight the Distill site. I'm going to demo now how to use the theme, new themer. So if I go to console, I'm going to minimize that so you can see a little bit better. Is my font big enough? Can somebody give me a thumbs up? Hopefully it's big enough. Okay.
Looks good to me.
Library, Distill, you can read it? Okay, good. Okay, so in Distill, I'm going to do create theme name, and I'm going to call it LA-RUG. So we're going to run that function. And you can see it gives me a nice little created CSS file at theme.css. To do, customize it to suit your needs. To do, add theme entry to your site article YAML. Okay, and then it gives you a little link that says see docs at, and that's what I'm going to lead you through right here. So what opens up also is this new CSS file that I just created called larug.css. And it gives me some base variables that have to do with the CSS custom properties for this site. So what we've essentially done is given you a way to override what the defaults are, but we've also revealed to you what the defaults are. So if you're sitting there looking at your site and you're thinking, ugh, the font size for the body is just like too small for me, I can't read it. You can see why. It's 1.06 REM here, which is relative units for relative to your normal default browser, which is usually 16 pixels. So if you wanted to increase the body size, you can change that number. Same with any of the other numbers that you see, those are all in pixels currently. You can also change main font colors. So if you know the hex color that you want for the title color, for example, or the header or the body color, any of these things, you can change those quickly. And you can also specify custom fonts. This is a little bit kludgy because you also have to import any fonts through Google Fonts. So there's a little bit at the top where it says optional, embed your custom fonts here with an import statement. So if you go to the documentation, there's some good examples to show you how to do all of those things. So what we've shown you how to do is to take this default page here, which is pretty similar to what we're looking at on my desktop. And I take you through the steps of being able to import a few fonts. And I'm just going to copy and paste from here. And I'm going to place those, oops, wrong repository. I'm going to place those at the top of my LA-RUG. So I'm going to import them all those fonts from Google Fonts. And I'm not going to spend too much time talking about that, but if you've ever imported Google Fonts before, this should be familiar. And if you haven't used Google Fonts before, this is probably one of the lowest hanging fruit ways to be able to get it into your site without locally hosting it. And then I'm going to map those fonts onto a few of the different custom properties in this file. So I'm going to change the heading font to the Omiri font, the monospace font to one called DM Mono, the body font to Bitter, and the navbar font to Omiri. So I'm going to scroll down here. I'm just going to replace those. So far, I've changed the fonts. I haven't changed any colors yet. I might go ahead and change these website header and footer colors because they're really easy to see when you go through it. And I know that those are down at the bottom of this page. So there's all kinds of different properties in here for you to change. People like changing all kinds of things, but hopefully what we've done is scope it out so that you don't have to do all the spelunking around in the CSS divs themselves, looking at the hosted website and doing inspect element for every single thing that you want to change. We tried to pull out the most common elements that you'd want to change and give you the variables to override them. So at this point, I should be making a site that looks like this. The pink background and slightly different fonts. The only thing I haven't done yet is I have not applied my theme. So I need to add the theme to my, my top level site YAML file. So I'm going to go back to the site YAML file here and show you that right now I have this output distill article oh, I'm not putting it under there. I'm putting it at the top level. So I'm going to add it. Maybe doesn't matter where I put it. And I called mine LA Rug. So I'm going to say theme. That's the new key here. And it has to be a CSS file. And it's expecting it to be in the project root. Of course, it doesn't work. Let me see. No set file directory. I'm not sure why that says that. Let's see if it'll go. Okay, it worked. All right, so I don't know what that error was about, but if I open this up in a new browser, you can see that it looks like a very different website. And actually all I did was change the fonts, and then I changed the colors around the header and the title here. So just a short demo to show you that the documents are there, and we hope what we've given people is a way to quickly experiment and play around with things. I know that there's actually a few people that I saw enter the room that have used the Distill themer and have come up with really beautiful sites. So that's exciting for us to see. And we hope that what that does is enable more people to make Distill sites for maybe all kinds of different organizations or personal websites even. We see it used a lot for personal blogs now because it's so easy to use, and because the only thing you need to worry about is your code actually running, which is not always the inconsequential thing, but maybe that's the thing that you should be focusing on instead of having your site be able to build. So that is kind of in a nutshell what the Distill themer does for you. Let's see. So there's a little bit more about what's the latest with the Distill package on the Rstudio blog. We just published this on Monday. This gives you a little bit of an overview about the package itself, sort of reintroducing it and telling you about the output formats, a little bit more about the single article HTML format, which I didn't talk too much about, and links to the features and how to find out more about them on the documentation sites. And then a little bit more information about websites and blogs, how to add site-wide search, and then a little bit more about the themer as well. Other highlights from this new version are that headings provide anchor links when you hover. So if you can see there, like if I wanted to link you to the specific section to apply the theme, if I click on that anchor there, then you can see that my URL changes to be #apply_theme at the end, and then I can copy and paste and send you the exact link to tell you how to apply the theme. We also have an improved default syntax highlighting theme, and that is designed specifically to meet WCAG 2.0 guidelines for contrast accessibility, which actually a lot of the syntax highlighters do not meet. So previously when you made a website, maybe with Distill or really any of our R Markdown output formats, and you use one of the built-in syntax highlighters, a lot of times if you ran diagnostics on the website, you would come up with warnings for low color contrast on your code. And that was kind of a hard thing to be able to change. So we designed the syntax highlighter to be able to kind of take that pain away. And so all colors in the syntax highlighter are above the 4.5 minimum threshold for color contrast compared to the normal background color of your code. We've also improved the handling and display of article categories for blogs. So on the Rstudio Ai blog, for example, you can now see that you have, it's visible which individual categories for every article are applied. It used to be that there was just this category listing over to the right, which was sort of helpful because you could click on it and you could see everything, say, related to Bayesian modeling. But if you were on the main listing page, you couldn't see that this article, maybe included the tabular data category, or that this one included the torch category. So we think we've made it a little bit more usable and a little bit more flexible for people. I also want to share that there is I guess the link is in my slides. There's a new package down site for the package that has this examples gallery here. And so this was really helpful to be able to see people in the community who made Distill sites and allowed us to link out to them. So some of these are personal sites. Some of these are also for teams that collaborate. So for example, the open source football blog is powered by Distill. It's a highly customized website, and it's a really beautiful version of something where a lot of different people contribute to the blog. And they do it all through GitHub and powered by the Distill package. So we hope that we've given you a lot of places to explore and maybe get excited and get started with website making with R Markdown, and maybe taken some of the pain away from feeling like you have to be a web developer or you have to know anything about static sites to be able to have a website with a blog. It's just a collection of HTML pages, but it can look really nice and it can be manageable and something that you can easily maintain. And if you want to post every 6 months, no shame in that. It will always build when you come back to it. So that's really a nice feeling. As someone who has subscribed to the blogdown model of blogging, I can say that when I finally get up the energy and the time to actually write a blog, it's a real bummer when the site doesn't build or when I have to deal with troubleshooting errors. So that's one nice thing about Distill. I think it's an easy workflow. So the next package that I wanted to share with you about was blogdown. And so I'm curious, I don't know if anyone here in your meetup has ever done this, but if you go to the participants link at in your Zoom, the bottom, where that will allow you to see like all the names of all the people that are attending. In that view, you can find a little button that would allow you to do like a thumbs up or a clap or something like that. So hopefully, I'm not sure if you guys can actually see my Zoom when I'm screen sharing. So hopefully I'm explaining this well. But what I'd love for you to do is if you've tried blogdown before, I would love for you to give me a thumbs up over here. So if you click again on participants on your Zoom menu, and you can see that there's a few different options. I'm going to give myself a thumbs up. So I see Emil, John Peach. Okay. I'm scrolling. Okay, I see a few people. Oh, I see Jenny Richmond here. Hi, Jenny. Kelsey Gonzalez, yes. Certified trainer at Rstudio. Okay, Sylvia, of course. Shelby. Okay. So it looks like actually not a lot of people have sampled this blogdown. So you may not feel immense pain and understand how much work we've done to decrease the pain, or maybe you were really smart and you decided to hold off on blogdown until we really got all the details worked out to make it more user-friendly and less scary. So either way, you know, maybe these new developments will give you some courage to try blogdown. If what you were thinking when you saw Distill was, oh, that's really great, but I need something that's a little bit more personal, or I need something that has a little bit more flexibility, and I'm not too scared about doing some kind of web development or CSS tweaking here and there, and maybe learning Hugo as well. So blogdown is kind of more our most like high-powered website making tool, and it's really geared towards giving people ultimate freedom and flexibility to make a lot of different kinds of websites. Whereas Distill is really optimized for being a collection of individual articles with the possibility of adding a blog. Blogdown, depending on the theme that you choose, can give you all sorts of access to all kinds of different looking sites that are pretty spectacular, and I'm always amazed at the things that people make in blogdown as well. So the developments I'm going to share today are still in the development version of blogdown. So you'll need to, if you want to use any of these features, you'll need to install from GitHub, from Rstudio blogdown. We're still doing some testing on the current version, which is version 0.22, but it should be on CRAN before the global conference in January, I imagine. So we're still working out some of the kinks on this. So hopefully, if you have any feedback, if you do end up trying any of this after our meetup tonight, I would really love to hear about it. We're trying to really make blogdown a little bit easier for people, including ourselves. We got a lot of internal feedback as well. So if you're a little bit unfamiliar with the blogdown package, the benefits are really that it gives you the power of Hugo, which is a static site generator. So it's a dependency, and it's one that you need to manage. You may not necessarily need to know Hugo as a templating language, but you will need to interact with Hugo at some level if you choose to go the blogdown route. So you should know its name and get to know it a little bit better. But Hugo is a static site generator that really allows for Markdown first content. So it's really nice for our Markdown users because you can knit your content from our Markdown into a Markdown format, and then Hugo builds your site from that. And it's a pretty beautiful system, and I actually really love the Hugo templating language the more I've learned about it. But in hindsight, looking back at younger me, when I first learned blogdown, I knew nothing about Hugo, but I knew I really wanted to make a cool looking website. And I was in a computer science department at the time, and I thought, what a shame that I'm sitting here with no website. And I made a better website than a lot of the computer science people with blogdown. So you can use blogdown without knowing all of Hugo, so don't be super intimidated to start. If you're feeling scared about Hugo, it's not that bad, but we've tried to make it better. Another one of the powerful things about blogdown is that you have access to a ton of themes. And I didn't include a link to this, but I'll take you to the Hugo themes site right now. This is the complete list. It's themes.gohugo.io. And any of these are Hugo themes that you can use with blogdown. So blogdown essentially gives you access to these Hugo themes and allows you to use the RStudio IDE to build your website and to include content that has R code chunks in it because you can use R Markdown. That's really what blogdown does for you. And historically, blogdown didn't add a lot more to the user experience. We've tried to add a little bit more in to help folks to be able to fall into the pit of success a little bit easier and not the pit of paralysis and despair with their sites. So if you scroll through the Hugo themes, you're bound to find one that looks tempting to you. I often advise people if they're just getting started with blogdown to try to pick like your top 5. And then don't be afraid to try individual themes, start tweaking them, and don't be afraid to just, chuck them, just trash them if you don't enjoy working with it, because you're going to be working with the theme for a while. And it's pretty hard to switch themes once you've already committed to one. But they do give you a lot of flexibility and power. You can also get subdirectories. So one of the really tempting things for a lot of people when they're looking to move past Distill and R Markdown sites and even bookdown sites to some extent is that blogdown allows you to have subdirectories of content, and you can have any kind of content that you want in a blogdown site. So it's really nice to be able to have those subdirectories and be able to be a little bit more organized, whereas a Distill site just ends up kind of having a lot of RMD files in it, and it can kind of be a little bit difficult to manage once you have a lot of those. So one of my favorite sites is Malcolm's personal site, actually, which I don't know if many people here have explored lately. This is built with the Hugo academic theme. It has a really nice kind of landing page, and you can see it's got really nice I forget what this part is called. It's like it's not the parallel X, it's the slider feature.
Carousel.
Carousel, thank you. So I really like that. I actually integrated it on my site after seeing Malcolm using it. It was so cool. But you can see that this just looks a lot more custom than the Distill site. So whereas a Distill site, you can change the colors and the fonts really easily, and we made that easier for you with the themer. A lot of blogdown sites, even if you use the same theme, end up looking pretty different to me. So they always look very custom, and like Malcolm's site, for example, is very Malcolm. So it's a nice way to get to know somebody. It's a nice welcome mat, and especially if you're going to be going on the job market at any point, it's a really nice way to put your portfolio together online. And my own site is also built with the academic theme, but just to show you how different it can look. This is the exact same Hugo theme, but just styled very differently. And there's my little carousel as well. I have a little bit different content, a little bit different headers. We have a lot of the same features. And then one of my past...
I stole some tricks from you too.
Yeah, it's one of the benefits of all using the same theme. And then one of my interns 2 years ago, Desiree, made this site. This is using the Hugo academic theme also. And I stole a lot of things from Desiree when she started playing with things. She's a CSS wizard. So this is also using the Hugo academic theme. So just because you're using even the same theme doesn't mean that your site's all going to look alike. You can really, the possibilities are endless. Really the main limiting factor is how much time you're willing to devote and how much CSS you want to learn and how much Hugo you eventually want to learn. But we did hear from a lot of people, including internal teams, my blogdown Hugo site is broken. And I had this happen to me several times, especially once you start building multiple sites, or even if you just have the one. It's very possible for your Hugo build to go down, and it's a little demoralizing when it happens. So our solution has been to try to make your blog down unbreakable. And this has involved a lot of steps and a lot of internal discussions on the R Markdown team, but I think we're to a place where we've at least tried to empower users. We can't necessarily promise it won't break, but we've tried to change some of the default behaviors and empower users to better be able to figure out what is the thing that broke or how can I prevent breakages in the first place. So I'm going to lead you through some of the things that we've been working on now. So some of the things that can go wrong, two of the main things that can go wrong, and I think of them as these little cats creating total mayhem. Hugo Versions, it can be mayhem. It is a static site generator and it does have versions and it does have things that become deprecated, certain functions in Hugo. It adds certain functions. And you may not be using Hugo yourself, you may just be using a theme. The trouble is the theme is using Hugo. And so themes can have Hugo dependencies as well. So you end up having really, when I say Hugo version, I kind of mean Hugo and theme versions. So that's two dependencies right there that can get out of whack and can cause you problems and make it kind of painful to figure out what's going on and how to save your site. The second thing that can go wrong is your R package versions. So if you've been doing this for a little bit and you have a few different blog posts, some things might change in the packages that are underlying your code. And the problem is that most times if you have any kind of R Markdown generated content, it's probably likely to be in your blog posts. And you are probably wanting your blog posts to just stay the way they were when you published them. So if you're not updating them, you probably want them to just stay frozen. You want them to be a fossil. And that's not necessarily how the default behavior of blogdown worked previously. So in past versions, sometimes blogdown would kind of try to reknit old RMD documents. It was due to some defaults in the package that we have now engineered away for you all, but that was part of the pain that many of us experienced, especially those of us who have kind of longer running sites and collaborate on GitHub. So how do we tackle the Hugo versioning problem? This was one that really hits into this many times. I feel that pain. So if you install the dev version of blogdown, you should be able to check your Hugo version. Now this was actually there before, so this is not necessarily a new function, but you should always be able to know how to check your Hugo version. So you should always know, even if you don't feel like you're interacting with Hugo, you're using a theme and you've definitely installed it when you've used blogdown. So at some point you've installed Hugo, you can check your Hugo version here. And the Hugo version looks like usually digits like, let's see, I'm gonna close out this. It's usually like a number, a decimal, two numbers, a decimal, and then another number at the end. So let me show you just what this looks like. I'm going to open up my personal site, which is thankfully still running, but I feel like my time clock is running out and I haven't actually adapted to this new version of blogdown yet on my personal site because it's still a global pandemic and I don't have a ton of free time. I have a 3-year-old. So I thought I'd use it as a great example to show you all what changes we can do here. So I'm going to do library blogdown and I'm going to type Hugo version. Okay. So you can see that I've got version 0.78.2 running. So this turned out to be actually really important. And it matters for my theme and it matters for my deployment plan for being able to publish. So you want to know what kind of Hugo version you're running locally. But you'd also like to set it and forget it. And so this is something new, and this is within projects. So if you do have multiple blogdown projects, you do this for every single project, but it's really a total game changer. And I haven't done it yet for my site, so I'm going to do it now. So in the development of version of blogdown, you can use this config_r profile function, and God willing, it works. It says, you know, some information here. It says the file R profile exists, so I will not overwrite it with this content, but it does tell me that a few options to customize the behavior of blogdown are listed here. And I didn't find the option Hugo blogdown.hugo version in R profile, so I will append that option to it. Okay, so that was a lot of stuff. Let's actually just look at the file. So what it does here, this top bit, is required if you've ever not worked with R profile files before. What this does is you can have a global R profile file on your computer, but then you can also have one per project. And so what this does is it looks for a global R profile first, and reads that in and then appends this so it doesn't try to replace that. So you can see that I actually already had my R profile set up to have a few options for blogdown set up, but I did not have the Hugo version set up. So it appended it at the bottom. I'm going to clean this up and move it up to this larger chunk. So now I have my blogdown version, Hugo version, frozen to be 0.78.2. So that means that blogdown will always build my site locally with that version of Hugo, which is really important to me because there's a lot of other sites that I run where I have to have different Hugo versions running simultaneously. And previously I had no way to version my Hugo versions. And that was a real sticking point for me in being able to manage multiple blogdown sites. So set it and forget it for every project. Now you can also tell Netlify and forget it. And now this was always the case, but we didn't necessarily surface it for users very easily. So there's a new function called config_netlify. And so I'm going to use that right now to show you that it opens up my existing netlify toml file. And it tells me a lot of stuff in there. It says the current existing netlify toml file is, the new netlify toml will be. And so it essentially is asking me permission to overwrite the existing netlify toml. So it looks like it's basically respecting what my existing toml file looks like it's just replacing all my 0.71.1s with the 0.782. So this is how I control what Netlify actually uses, the version of Hugo that Netlify uses to build my site. And it's really important to keep those two in sync. So you want your local version of Hugo when you're building your blogdown site to match the Netlify version. So I'm going to actually tell it no. I do not want it to rewrite, and I'm going to do this manually because I like the formatting and it looks like it's going to mess up my formatting. All right, so that means I've frozen my R profile, I've frozen my blogdown version, and I've frozen my Hugo version in Netlify. And usually you only need to set it once in this build environment variable. A final thing that we've added with Hugo versions is that you can now manage, because now that there's multiple versions of them, how do you see what you have? And I actually have a mess of Hugo versions, it turns out. I've got 3 and I had no idea. So I have 71.1, now that's for a site that I know of, so I want to keep that. And then 78.2 is my current version, and I think that's more of the up-to-date version. And then I have this number 3 here, use our local bin Hugo. I don't really know what that is. And I think I've been advised that I can remove it. So you can use a new function called remove Hugo. And I'm not sure if this will work. I have not tested this yet because I didn't want to, I had such a perfect borked up blogdown repo that I thought I'll give it a shot. No, I can't do it there. Okay. I probably can't figure this out live. I tried looking at the documentation for remove Hugo. It requires a version, and I don't know what the version is for that one. So I'll leave it. But if I wanted to remove 71.1, I could probably use remove Hugo to do that, but I do not want to do that because I want to keep it. And then R package versions. That is the other thing that can get out of sync. And you would like to be able to freeze maybe the package version that you used when you knit your document. Now, we don't necessarily have some kind of package management system for blogdown, but what we did do was we made it so that you could have the option to always knit your own content yourself. So one of my favorite commit messages by Iway was make the knit button great again. This was a very exciting day for those of us who've used blogdown. So if you've ever used blogdown before and you've accidentally had that muscle memory to click the knit button and experienced all kinds of weird errors that you couldn't debug, it was because you couldn't use the knit button to knit to the right output format with blogdown. We've since fixed that, so you can actually knit now. So when you're working on any kind of R Markdown content in a blogdown site, you can click the knit button just as you normally would, and it will render to the right output format. So you don't need to have that fear of using the knit button again. So that's one way to help you manage your own R content, is make sure that you're the one doing the knitting. Now, if you want to be the one doing the knitting, you also have to actually tell blogdown not to be a knitter. So the way you do this is to go back to that R profile file. I didn't leave mine open. So it's another option that we add to the R profile file. It's this blogdown knit on save equals false. So the current default behavior of blogdown is that anytime I have an R Markdown document open, when I save it, it'll automatically knit it. So I really recommend to run knit on save false because that means that you can kind of work on a document a little bit easier. You can run it in interactive mode where you're running code chunks and maybe testing out the code, but you're not trying to knit the full document and rebuild your site every time you save, which was what would happen in the previous behavior. And then I also really recommend setting this option, this files filter. It's a little cryptic, and I apologize for not having time to explain this more, but this was part of one of the reasons why if you ever used blogdown with GitHub, that you might have gotten into various stages of paralysis with your websites where blogdown was detecting that certain posts needed to be reknit and they didn't actually need to be reknit. I know that happened to us many times on our education site. So what this does is it basically tells blogdown not to use timestamps anymore, because if you're pulling and pushing from GitHub, the timestamps are known to kind of not be very reliable. And that was actually the issue with the previous behavior. So I really recommend setting this files filter, MD5 sum filter. It essentially creates a file hash and allows you to work off that rather than timestamps. So both of those should help people be able to keep their R package versions just the way you want them. And if you have a knitted file in your content directory, you'll know that it's just going to stay there and blogdown's not going to try to force you to reknit that file. So I know I covered a lot of R profile options, which might be a little bit new for people in terms of being able to interact with a package. So here's a kind of larger, healthy R profile for happy blogdown users. So having whatever blogdown Hugo version set here is equal to what you locally have. You want blogdown to know that version and you want to kind of freeze it. You don't want it to knit on save. You'd like to do the knitting yourself. And especially now that the knit button works, you can click knit to knit. That makes life a lot easier. Setting that blogdown doesn't use timestamps to figure out when to knit. It instead uses file hashes. And then there's some other nice to haves here too. I'm not going to spend too much time on these. They're slightly documented in the blogdown book, but we're working on improving that as well. We did change the default so that now all blogdown sites start with page bundles. And if you're working on a very old site with blogdown and you're thinking to yourself, what on earth are page bundles? We're improving the documentation right now. And we also included a new function to help people bundle a site that is unbundled. So look for the bundle_site function. It's currently in the development version. If you're sitting there wondering, oh, but I actually really liked the previous behavior of blogdown, where sometimes it would try to reknit all of my R Markdown documents in mass, you can still do that. You can use the build site function, and the argument is build_RMD equals true. So what this will do is it will en masse knit all of your R Markdown content and build your site at the same time. So be careful. This is a warning. But if you liked that behavior, you can keep that behavior. And this is because blogdown build site no longer recompiles R Markdown files by default because it may be expensive and often undesirable to compile RMD files that have been compiled before. Oops. If you don't want to recompile if you do want to recompile the files, use this. So a really good example is the Tidy Models site, for example. This is a website built with blogdown that I made that had dependencies of a lot of packages that I actually couldn't install that required rstan. And we were having immense troubles because blogdown would try to reknit those posts that Max had written, and Max had all the stan installations complete on his computer. I did not. And we ended up having to go through some saving of the files in an external project and bringing them back in because I couldn't build my site because it kept trying to rebuild. So this is a really important one for me, but I recognize that it's also important sometimes to be able to rebuild everything at once and just torch the whole site and rebuild it. So you also still have that option. If you're an old school blogdown user like myself, you might be wondering now when I render my site, what happened to public? So what used to happen is in your files pane, when you did a local preview of your site, it created this public directory, and that was actually what the site was that you were building and previewing. We're actually switched to a different renderer, so it's not generating the public site anymore. but you can force it to generate the public site by doing this build site function. So if you're missing public and you want it back, that's how to get it back. So I know that was a lot, and you may not even know where to start with this menu. So let me throw one more thing at you. We added something that we are trying out with Blogdown. We're thinking of it as like a pre-flight checklist. So we now have some checking functions that will hopefully help you be able to have some sanity in your Blogdown sites, but also we think better work with collaborators. So if you have somebody who's doing like a guest authored post for you, for example, or somebody who doesn't know all of Blogdown and they're trying to contribute to your site, but you're thinking, oh no, there's so many landmines, there's so many ways that things can go horribly wrong. We added these pre-flight checks to hopefully help you so that you could at least tell them to be able to install the Blogdown package and run these checks and make sure they come out clean. And it'll hopefully help you, help guide you through how to do the right thing. So you can check your entire site by doing check_site. And what it will do is it will wrap all of these individual checks below it. So that's a shortcut. I'm going to show you them one at a time real quick. So check config is checking your configuration file for your site. So if you open up config toml, or sometimes it's a YAML file, it looks like this. It's a lot of content there, but there are a few landmines that we know of that we can help you prevent. So I'm going to show you what check config looks like right now in my console. So you can see that it's checking my config toml file. It actually opened it up for me here. It checked my base URL setting, made sure that there was actually something there. Sometimes when you have a demo site with Blogdown, it has just a / and you don't want that in production. And checking the ignore files setting. So it's telling me that I do need to change some things in my ignore files field. I'm recommended to ignore more items in my ignore files field. And I'm recommended to remove the _files $ in my configuration toml. And then it also checks to make sure that the unsafe option for goldmark is used. And this is due to a breaking change in Hugo a while back where they changed the default Markdown renderer for Hugo. And that made a lot of people's sites not show up anymore, which was a fun change. So Hugo versions matter. So it looks like I need to remove this part. And it looks like it wants me to add a lot more to my ignore files, but I'm just going to remove the thing that it told me to. So that's the first one. That's check config. Let's do my check get ignore. So it checked my get ignore, and what it was doing was it was actually making sure that we've seen a lot of people who had in their get ignore ignoring the rendered files. Sometimes that can cause problems. My get ignore is actually pretty clean. I'm ignoring my public folder and my resources folder because I'm actually doing a continuous deployment build through Netlify. So it's creating my public folder for me. So it looks like my get ignore is coming out clean. Check Hugo. I think I should have fixed that right now. So it says checking Hugo using Hugo 0.78.2. You're recommended to set the version of Hugo via options in our profile. Okay, I did that. It looks like it's not reading that correctly. I might need to restart it for that to work. Check Netlify. It's checking my Netlify file. What it's actually doing is it's making sure that my published directory public matches what's in my config toml file. And it's checking to make sure that my Hugo version here matches the same Hugo version in the R profile file. So it's not very chatty right now. We're going to work on how that looks to users to make it a little bit clearer. And then the final one that you can run is check content. So check content does a lot of stuff for you, but it's all checking that content folder. So that's usually where you would put all of your stuff. So content is where I have my blog posts. It's where I have all of the stuff that you see on my actual site. And so what it's doing is it's searching for posts with future published dates, because we know that these end up not getting rendered on a published Hugo site. And this is often a gotcha for new users. So we're screening to see if there's any posts or any content with future published dates. And it flags one of them, but I know that to be there, and it's intentionally not published yet. So that's good that it found that. It's also searching for draft posts. So draft is one of the YAML keys in a blogdown post that you can use if you want to sandbox your content for a while, but it's often confusing because people, when they go to publish, forget to remove the draft true key in their YAML. And so they're wondering, why is my post not coming up? And it's because it's marked as a draft. So we also screen for those to help you catch those. We also check for R Markdown posts that have not been rendered. So because now if you're not knitting on save, and if you're knitting with intention, it is possible that you could try to publish something and you just have the RMD file in your repository, but you forgot to knit. So that's essentially what it's checking for, is did you forget to knit or not? Checking for R Markdown posts that have both MD and .R Markdown and .html output files. So this is checking for duplicate content. And this is a real gotcha for people who might be using the knit button and then also kind of be working interactively. Sometimes you can create different artifacts of the same post with different file extensions. And the way Hugo renders is it chooses the HTML first. So this is often confusing if people decide to switch and want to create a Markdown post instead. They'll be confused about why the content that they're seeing published isn't updated. And it's because Hugo has grabbed the HTML first. And maybe you forgot that there was an HTML file in there. So this is checking for duplicate rendered output files. Checks for R Markdown posts that are older than their output files. So this should flag ones that maybe look like they might be out of date. And it also checks for bad HTML files generated with old versions of blogdown. So when you use the knit button, when the knit button didn't work, it would have created an HTML file that would have looked really odd or possibly not rendered when you published. So it also checks for that. So it does a lot of screening for you, and we hope that this helps kind of create a little bit of a safety net and a little bit more of a feeling of empowerment for users to be able to feel like they can be more proactive instead of reactive when they get build errors or when they see things surprising on their website or when they don't see something that they're expecting to be seeing. There's all kinds of things that can make you feel really powerless when you're first starting to work with blogdown, and if it's one of your first experiences working with HTML-based outputs and websites and static site generators. And we know it's a complicated field. So we tried to build these pre-flight checks to be able to support anybody who's also teaching blogdown, so that you can really help lead people through all the different elements, because there are a lot of moving pieces. Even just looking at these checks, you can see that we have to check the interaction with GitHub, our configuration file, Hugo, Netlify, and then finally our R Markdown content. So there's a lot of moving pieces, and we hope that we've given people a bit of a roadmap to be able to problem solve on your own, and also help you be able to find better documentation to help you and not feel so paralyzed if your site doesn't build or if you see an error. So I basically tried to do the R profile and pre-flight checks demo while I was talking. I have a learn more with a grimace emoji. We are in the process of updating the blogdown book, but we did put a note from the authors at the top of it that some of the information and instructions in the book are now out of date because of changes to both Hugo. Hugo changed a lot after we published the book originally, and then now the blogdown package, hopefully in the better direction, but we know that we're working on that. So we do have a link there. If you go to the blogdown book, suggestions for improving the book, and please file an issue in the GitHub repository. I'm going to show you what that looks like right now. So if you Google blogdown book, it's the first link that comes up. If you click on the link there, it'll take you to a place to make a suggestion for documentation improvements. This would be really helpful for us as we're starting to work. We're going to be trying to make documentation improvements as we wrap up these new developments, new developmental features that we're testing out. So please feel free to make any requests. If you've tried to learn blogdown before and you've gotten stumped over something and you felt like the book needed more coverage of something, this is exactly where you can file your grievances, and we will find them and we will try to address them. Anything that you enter here will also be automatically labeled with the documentation label for us, so it makes it easier for us to be able to keep track of it and close the issues as we're going through and start updating the book. If you've had any other issues with using blogdown, when you go to the new issue in GitHub link, you'll see that we've created a little bit more of a GitHub template for issues. So you can now choose bug reports, documentation improvements, feature requests, or you can link to an unanswered question. So we do have some rules about whether you put questions in the GitHub, for example, because we really try to rely on forums like Stack Overflow and the community site for that. But if you have an unanswered question for 24 hours, we do give you the option to link us to that so that we can have the possibility of trying to either address it, or it might stem from something that we can fix on our end. So we have that option as well. And then we have links to an issue guide. And we also have the links to ask a question on our Studio community or to asking a question on Stack Overflow there. So time check is 9:28. I won't have time to go into bookdown or xaringan. Blogdown ended up taking up, we had a lot of improvements to go over. One of the major things about bookdown that's changed is that there's a new output format for HTML-based books. It's called Bootstrap 4 Book, BS4 Book. It's developed by Hadley Wickham. You can see a pretty awesome example of it in production here. This is very stylized, but still a very nice looking version of the Bootstrap 4 book. It's got really nice search. Actually, the search is the same as in Distill. It's powered by Fuse.js. So like, let's see what psychology brings up if I do that. The search works much better than the default search with Bookdown, if you've ever used that before. This is also currently in production at R for Data Science as well, Bootstrap 4 book. It is also in production at rpackages.org. So you can see all kinds of different versions of this. It's not yet on CRAN, but it is on its way. So that's the newest output format for Bookdown. And then xaringan, the biggest news on xaringan, if you have been a user and you've been blocked by this, we now have the ability to have self-contained slides. This was actually the third issue filed in the xaringan repo a long, long time ago. Let's look at the date. It was originally written in December 2nd, 2016. It was closed September 24th. I think. So I think it was kind of a real difficult, tricky problem to solve. But if you've ever worked with xaringan and been blocked by needing to be able to be connected to the internet when you built your slides, then you might want to look into that new feature. It's not well documented yet, but we are also working on that as well.